Nonetheless, my duty is to decide on the proper sentence, knowing as I do that no life sentence passed on you can ever heal the bereaved family's loss and grief. In the small hours of Saturday the 18th of February 1999 in Felixstowe, Emily Doherty had been out clubbing but ended up separated from her friends and her husband. So she set off to walk back to where she was staying. You tried to kidnap her, but she was too alert and too quick and escaped, managing to rouse a couple by banging on their front door, who then called the police. I am sure that if you had managed to abduct her, you would have killed her. That is a dreadful thing to conclude, but I do so based on what you did the next night, what you did in 2006, and on the simple fact that Miss Doherty had seen your face and your car's number plate. So there is no way you would have set her free to have you arrested. That same Saturday, the 18th of September, Victoria Hall went to her part-time job, then came home and got dressed up, ready to go out. She left her home in Trimley St Mary, just by Felixstowe, about 9 p.m, and met with her friend Gemma Algar. The two of them went to the Bandbox nightclub in Felixstowe. They had a drink, they danced with each other, and at 1 a.m. they left. They went and got chips near the seafront, and then set off to walk home, singing as they went. They parted company quite close to their homes at about 2:20, and that was the last time anybody, apart from you, saw Victoria Hall alive. Miss Hall's naked body was found 5 days later in the village of Creeting St Peter, about 25 miles from her home. Expert evidence shows she must have been killed within an hour or two of being abducted by being asphyxiated. The fact she was naked and the later discovery of your DNA material in swabs taken from her vagina and vulva show you not only abducted and murdered that child, you also either raped or sexually assaulted her. I've heard today evidence from her brother Stephen Hall on behalf of himself and his father Graham. I've also heard from Miss Hall's best friend Gemma Algar and from Emily Doherty. Miss Doherty has been left with lifelong anxieties about walking after dark and being spoken to by any man she doesn't know, and by a sense of guilt, blaming herself absolutely wrongly for not being more insistent that the police at the time took her case more seriously. Gemma Algar spoke of being traumatised and changed for life. Graham and Stephen Hall spoke in simple, calm words that are hard for any decent person to listen to. They spoke of the loss of Victoria's plans of university, marriage and children, the pain that has lasted for 26 years and is going nowhere. Graham Hall writes, and I quote, "I miss Victoria every day and will do so for the rest of my life." Perhaps the only thing that can be said in your favour is that you pleaded guilty. Your delaying until almost the day of trial, however, meant that Miss Hall's mother, Lorinda, died in December last year without knowing that her daughter's killer had finally been brought to justice. The nature of a life sentence means the other terms of imprisonment for attempting to kidnap Miss Doherty and kidnapping Miss Hall have to be concurrent. That means totality and double counting between the different counts are not issues. To reflect the attempted kidnap in the total sentence I passed today, I will add an element to the minimum term. Under the Sentencing Council guidelines for kidnapping, I need to assess your culpability and the harm caused, or, by way of Section 63 of the Sentencing Act 2020, that might foreseeably have been caused. Victoria Hall died and Emily Doherty would have done had you been able to carry out your plan. Both were young women, alone at night, and therefore you were deliberately targeting a particularly vulnerable victim. That places both offences in category 1A with a starting point sentence of 11 years and a range of 8 to 16 years. The death of one victim and the prospect of the death of the other would lead me, after a trial, to impose sentences of 14 years for Victoria Hall's kidnap and 10 for Emily Doherty's, the latter reduced as it was an attempt. Your late guilty pleas mean those sentences will be 12 and 9 years imprisonment. Guidance on the imposition of the mandatory life sentence minimum term is set out in Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act 2020. I've considered the decision of the Court of Appeal in the case of Stewart, Cousins, Tustin and Hughes. I will not add to the length of these remarks by rehearsing what's set out with great clarity in that judgment, save to highlight 2 points. First, Schedule 21 must be applied in a flexible, not rigid way to achieve a just result. Second, whole life terms are a sentence of last resort for crimes of the greatest gravity, and if I am in any doubt about imposing such a sentence, a minimum term order is likely to be the correct disposal. These crimes were committed in 1999, which means I have to first consider what the minimum term should be under the modern day provisions of Schedule 21, then consider if I need to modify that term so as not to exceed that which the Secretary of State would have chosen under the law that was in place in 1999. How far your sentence for the murder of Victoria Hall should be increased because of the 5 later murders is not, legally speaking, straightforward. The Court of Appeal have made clear that those later murders do not, under Schedule 21, mean this crime counts as a, quote, murder by an offender previously convicted of murder, unquote, because you killed Victoria Hall some years before those other victims. See Stewart, Cousins, Tustin, Hughes and Monaghan. I am sure, however, that your situation must be made more serious by those killings, though I must be careful not to elevate this sentence to the extent I am punishing you again for offences that have already led to 5 life sentences. I would regard those crimes as relevant to the task I have to carry out today, and with respect I have my doubts as to whether a previous decision of the Court of Appeal is properly understood as excluding that conclusion. And as a part of Archibald in the case of Darrigan are the relevant references. The Court of Appeal decision of Ali Adam expresses far more authoritatively than anything I say the same doubt about that understanding of Darrigan, but confirms that later offending can be relevant to the sentencing decision. If, and I stress if, I was just applying Schedule 21, I would have passed a whole life term, given 1, that schedule defines a child as anyone under 18, and the murder of a child involving the abduction of the child would normally be a case for that sentence. That applies here, as Victoria Hall was 17. 2, there is very significant aggravation in the rape or sexual assault of Ms. Hall. 3, she must have experienced mental and physical suffering for some period of time before you killed her, between 1 and 2 hours. 4, there must have been a significant degree of premeditation given the attempt the night before. 5, your later conduct, however it is legally characterised, in committing 5 murders in 2006 aggravates your case. 6, there is a need to add to your effective sentence to reflect the attempt to kidnap Emily Doherty the day before. I do not add to it for the kidnap of Miss Hall, as I've already taken that as an aggravating feature of her murder. 7, there may be some slight qualification to treating Victoria Hall as a child, as she was only weeks away from being an adult, and there is definite mitigation in your guilty plea, but those matters are far outweighed by the aggravating factors I have just listed. Do I need to modify that term so as not to exceed that which the Secretary of State would have chosen under the law that was in place in 1999? In my view, I do. I read the Court of Appeal decisions to which I was directed by the prosecution and defence, in particular Sullivan, Gibbs, Eleanor and Eleanor. There are a number of aggravating matters under the guidance at the time, as set out in Lord Bingham's letter to judges, and they are the same as those I have already listed. I am very conscious, however, of the case of In re Taylor, in which Mr. Justice Openshaw, a distinguished judge, hugely experienced in the criminal law, commented that under the old system, quote, whole life terms were reserved for the very few notorious multiple offenders, end of quotation. I conclude that I cannot approach the sentence for the murder in 1999 on the basis I'm punishing a serial killer, as you were not yet that. And there is at least a steer against regarding you as such in Stewart and others, the case I've already referred to. All the aggravating factors I have already listed would have led, under the old rules, to a minimum term slightly above 40 years. But given your late guilty plea, I deduct 1/20th, so 40 years is the term I will impose. Even if this was your only life sentence, given your obvious dangerousness and your age, it is extraordinarily unlikely you would ever be released. Given the sentence already imposed for your other dreadful crimes, it is well nigh certain you will die in prison. The sentences I impose are: 1, for the attempted kidnap of Emily Doherty, 9 years imprisonment concurrent; 2, for the kidnap of Victoria Hall, 12 years imprisonment concurrent; 3, for the murder of Victoria Hall, I pass a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years.
Today, we finally have justice for our Victoria. It won't bring her back, but it will finish the police inquiries and the case being revisited. Unfortunately, my wife Lorinda has not lived to see this day, but she did know that it probably was Steve Wright. Victoria was a loving girl with a whole life before her, with plans of what she wanted to achieve. All this was snatched away from her by Steve Wright. We lost our lovely daughter, sister, niece, granddaughter, have endured 26 years of hell, which will continue from today onwards and forever. We thank the Suffolk Police for their time and resources spent on this case, especially DCI Caroline Miller, who is the DCI who reopened the case 7 years ago. Her care, tenacity and determination to find answers was amazing, and also to the other SIOs who have followed her, finishing with DCI Matt Connick, who has closed the case and showed care and understanding over the last couple of years. Thank you to them. Also to our son Stephen for his continued support and love, and of course our family liaison officers, especially DC Beck Gooch, who has been with us since day one in 1999. What an amazing job she has done. A wonderful person who has always looked after us and making sure we knew what was happening with the case. And finally our final FLO, DCI Miranda Cliff, who for the last couple of years has supported Beck, and we couldn't have got through without them. Thank you.
Today's sentencing marks the conclusion to an extensive and painstaking murder investigation. 26 years ago, Victoria Hall was just 2 weeks away from her 18th birthday and had her whole life ahead of her. This was cut short so cruelly. This appalling crime had a profound impact on Victoria's family and friends, along with communities in Felixstowe, Trimley St Mary, Cretan St Peter and across Suffolk. I wish to pay tribute to Victoria's father Graham and her brother Stephen, who now finally know who is accountable for these shocking actions. This demonstrates that time is no barrier to justice. Special mention must be given to Emily, at the time a 22-year-old woman who narrowly escaped the depraved actions of this man the night before Victoria was taken. We do not understand the impact, or we do not underestimate the impact that this night has had on her and continues to do so. I'm glad we've been able to provide answers and a sense of justice being delivered. Whilst this was a guilty plea, this was not an early guilty plea. Steve Wright made significant attempts to cover his tracks after the offence. He was interviewed twice by police over the course of 2 years, whilst the investigation developed, and was in the court system for 21 months with legal hearings challenging the evidence. He was forced into a position where he had no alternative but to plead guilty to all 3 offences with the weight of evidence against him. This has been a complex reinvestigation spanning over 7 years. I want to thank the officers and staff who have worked tirelessly on this investigation to develop and present all the evidence in this case. Their persistence is the reason for this result. I wish to thank the commitment of Cellmark Forensic Services, who have worked on the investigation for the last 5 years, testing and retesting exhibits and pushing the boundaries of latest DNA techniques to deliver significant evidence about the man responsible for this murder. The police team have worked closely with the Crown Prosecution Service over several years, presenting a compelling case, and we are grateful for the expertise of Specialist Prosecutor Sam Woolley, Miss Ledwood King's Counsel and Miss Blair. To all the witnesses who were prepared to attend court to give evidence at trial despite the passage of time, and to all those who provided information to assist the police inquiry since 1999, thank you. This was always about Victoria Hall and her family. They have been front and centre and a consistent source of motivation to the police investigation team. They have shown strength, courage, dignity and support to the investigation team, and our thoughts remain with them today and for the time ahead.